You're listening to a Rev FM production podcast. Welcome to Pastors Live, the show that discusses things of the Bible and current events for people who love to laugh. And now, the hosts who answer questions with more questions. It's Pastors Dave, Ty, Shane, and the other guy.
You know what's more popular than the E-Trade babies? I can't believe it.
What's that?
Volkswagen The Force. And number 5 of all time, the McDonald's showdown between MJ
and
Larry Bird.
Larry Bird. I saw that one the other day.
Oh, that's right.
That was really
I forgot
good.
about that.
Yeah.
Well,
It surprises
and
me.
by the way, we've been in the studio since yesterday talking about Super Bowl ads, apparently.
love it.
So, hey, it's Pastors Live. It's Wednesday. It's February 12th.
This Friday, we have the St. Valentine's Gala. Into the Forest. It's a celebration of joy. And I really think people are going to be surprised. When you go into the fellowship hall here, it'll be like going into the forest. We have a caterer that I can talk about now because registration's closed, and so you're either coming or you're not. I told you, we have a caterer that we have never used before. It is going to be amazing. We have sweet and salty charcuterie, and they are catering our dinner that night, and their stuff is amazing.
Oh, yes.
And it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful night. And we're just going to celebrate marriage. We're going to celebrate the scriptures, and we're going to celebrate one another. There's going to be some really cool dancing, everything from classical to some sort of upbeat stuff. I mean, every genre you can imagine. It's going to be a wonderful, fun evening. So, hey, if you're registered, dress up a little bit. You don't have to put on a tux and an evening gown, but, dress a little nicer, take your gal out, and have a wonderful evening.
Oh, we're looking forward to that.
Doors open at 5:30.
Okay.
The event starts at 6.
Awesome. And then we also have the ladies conference coming up.
Yes.
On the 14th and 15th of March. We have Easter weekend, which is coming up in April. Also that week we have a Seder dinner. We have a Good Friday service plus our weekend services. And then the week after that, we have our men's conference on April 26th, and we're looking forward to that. And we're also starting to lay out some other things. We've got Church in the Park coming up, first weekend in August. We have our Christmas Eve services getting all planned. We
Family camp over Labor Day weekend.
Family camp is Labor Day weekend. So if you're curious about anything we have going on here, hey, go to watersprings.net and check it out.
Absolutely.
Or you can call us at 208-524-4747.
I have a request or a question.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Is Mrs. Orr playing the harp on Good Friday?
That is the plan currently. And so
depending on how things sort of shake out. But
depending how things go out. But
that
the plan
people
is,
love that.
Lori will
They
be
love
playing harp on Good Friday.
I love it.
And so we're looking forward to that. And so there's just so many wonderful things. Of course, we have some construction projects around campus here that we're starting to work on and getting some things going as we get towards spring. But Dave, I was thinking about something the other day, and this is an interesting thing when we talk about church, right? We talk about church and church buildings. And I think a church building should reflect holiness as unto the Lord. I really do believe that. I believe that, if you think about the house of the Lord, it should look like it's the house of the Lord. It should not look like it's in disrepair. And we have places in the scripture that kind of talk about when the house of the Lord is in disrepair and when things aren't taken care of. That's a sign that something's not healthy. Right? When the house isn't taken care of. And so I think that there's a point when we talk about people serving the Lord and getting involved in ministry. Did you guys know? I don't think people realize how much effort it takes to take care of a building. No matter if your church only sits 50 or it seats 5,000, your church building requires the people of God to participate in the work of the house of the Lord, cleaning things up, taking care of things, straightening things up. And so things are not in disarray. It's the house of the Lord. Things shouldn't look out of place. You know what I mean? It's like when you come into the house of the Lord, there shouldn't be a chair in the middle of an aisle. Like you're like, why is that chair there? And why is that out of place? It's God's house. Because God's house is a house of order. So Dave, over the years, you and I've been in different churches. We've been
right.
And the Calvary Chapel movement, it's like you kind of move into wherever the pigeons used to be, right? You kind of move in. I know you guys went through that Hosanna, right? Because it was an old theater.
Brought an old movie theater that had been abandoned for 10 years. It was it was the
first congregants.
It was the toilet for every transient in Los Angeles County. It was terrible.
Yeah, it was terrible.
And when we moved in there, when we bought it, it stunk. It was terrible. All the doors were open. All the seats and carpet was being ripped out. We wanted to send the seats down to Mexico to a couple of the orphanage and chapels we worked down there. And they were so nasty, and I won't get into the details of why, but it was the absolute worst, most disgusting stuff. We couldn't do that, and we ended up throwing away a lot of that. But we had to go in there and all but fumigate this silly thing. But
we want to make sure.
And now it's one of the most beautiful spots on the boulevard.
It is. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I just think that sometimes we don't realize how important it is that we are. We're taking care of God's house in a way that represents the glory of the Lord, and I think sometimes we miss that it's God's house, and I think about there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in my life, and I know with your ministry that you do here and all those other things, and sometimes there's stuff on our desks and we're working on stuff, but like our offices should be, people should come in to, hey, this is the house of the Lord. I've come into one of the chambers in the house of the Lord. I mean, this is the Lord's house. And if you're part of a church and it's a smaller church, hey, step in and help out. But even if you're part of a larger congregation, be willing to say, hey, you know what? I can give a couple hours a week to my church family. And maybe I'm not comfortable in the children's ministry, or I'm more of a shy person, but you can come in and you can, serve on the campus and serve by. I'm willing to plant flowers, pull weeds, help with lawn, whatever. So when people come onto the campus of the house of the Lord, it looks like that.
Yeah, agreed. I love on Sundays and Saturday nights, Wednesday nights, watching people from our fellowship that are making their way through the sanctuary after a service and things have kind of cleared out, and they're picking up bulletins or candy wrappers or cups or whatever that have been left around, and just taking it upon themselves to pitch in. I absolutely love that. And, you don't always get a chance to just go over and say thank you, because sometimes we're praying with folks or we're meeting with people, and believe me, we see it and we love it when we see folks from the fellowship that are saying, you know what, before I walk out of here, this section that I was sitting in tonight, I'm going to reach down and, pick up the bulletins or the coffee cups or the candy wrappers that were left behind. And I just love that. And that's what Ty's talking about, right? Hey, if this is your church home, wherever you attend, and you're saying, man, this is home. Well, what would you do at your home? If you're getting ready to button it up for the night and you look over there and your kids have, left a couple of napkins, a couple of paper towels on the living room floor, or, they left their glass out there. Well, you don't go out and, wake up your kids in bed and make them get up and go out there and clean it. No, you pick it up and throw it away or whatever it is. And maybe the next morning you say, hey, buddy, when you went to bed last night, you left a mess out there. But the point being, it's your home, so you take care of it. Hey, man, whatever church you go to, wherever you live, wherever you're listening, whatever church you attend, just say, hey, is there something I can do to help out? At the very least, like Ty was saying, you pick stuff up. I know when I'm in the men's room here at Water Springs,
right?
When I am washing my hands, I always take a bunch of extra paper towels and I dry the counter
because it's a mess
around, right? Because there's always water on the counter, and
especially when we're busy.
It's interesting to me every time I do it, which is every time I'm in there and I'm drying up around me. Guys around me will grab paper towels and dry around their sink too.
Yeah,
and if we all just did that, if we all just did the little things, so that when guests come in, they're not going, man, this place is gnarly.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, we forget that it's not just a building. I mean, we have that conversation saying, look,
it's sticks and bricks, but it's the sticks and bricks we meet together with the Lord.
Well, that's the point. The church building is the church building. It's a building the church gathers for holy worship, for holy communion, for baptism. It is the house of the Lord. And I think it's so very, very important that we treat the ministry and mission with the weight that it actually requires. One of the places that we find ourselves today in our reading is at the very end of Matthew. And Matthew 28, at the very end, Jesus says, and Jesus speaks to them, and he says, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. And by the way, it's a lot of fun if you want to go check out Daniel 7, 13 and 14, and other places as well. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 2, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 22. There's some other places, right? Philippians 2, 9. But all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. He says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I've commanded you. Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And I love those promises that God is with us. But as God is with us, and he's saying, hey, I want you to go make disciples. I want you to teach them all these things. I think sometimes we forget that when we gather together, that's a big deal, because we're supposed to stir one another up to love and to good works. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25, especially even more as we see the day approaching. But there's a point when we gather together. And again, Dave, you're right. It's just sticks and bricks. But in the reality is, it's actually the house of the Lord when we are together in it. And it should reflect the beauty of God. And a lot of Eastern churches really did that in the Eastern Orthodox space. They wanted it to be beautiful, to match,
very ornate.
And by the way, just if you think about it, I mean the ornateness of the tabernacle. We're getting there in Exodus on Wednesdays, so you have to come join us tonight. We'll talk about that. But yeah,
well, yeah, and when you look at the design for the tabernacle and ultimately the temple, it's God's design, and what's happening there, man, there's angels that are embroidered into the curtains. There's angels that are carved out into the wood. You got a guy named Bezalel. And the Bible says, God says to Moses, there is a man named Bezalel on whom I have placed my spirit to be a craftsman. Wow, wait a minute. You mean one of the spiritual gifts apparently was that? Because we often think about, there's 9 gifts or there's 12 gifts. There's all these arguments, people, there's 12 apostles. Well, hold it. Barnabas was called an apostle. Jesus was called an apostle. So, you have to define your terms. And we talk about people being spiritually gifted. It's not just giving, administration, teaching, tongues, interpretation of tongues, healing. He says that he put his spirit on Bezalel and to do this craftsmanship, this work. And so, sometimes you can go into a church and some people will complain and say, they put too much money into this. I'll tell you what, when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD by General, come on, dude, Titus Vespasian, and the fire was lit in the temple as he commanded not to have happen. All that gold started melting, and they literally fulfilled the testimony or the prophecy of Christ that not one stone would be left upon another. Why? Because they were trying to get that gold. They're scraping that gold. My point being, it was very ornate, and that was God's design.
It was God's design.
It was beautiful.
Right. And then so if you guys want a fun thought, right? So here's where it gets really interesting if you think about it. So let's talk about the beauty of the New Jerusalem, right? So this beautiful picture of this city that comes down, it's
not made out of cinder blocks.
It's not made out of cinder blocks, right? But I was reading a book the other day, which I by Drummond, which I thought was really great, and I was reading it, and he makes this point. He goes, look, whether it's square or not, let's talk about what it represents. The issue is it represents the Holy of Holies from Exodus. It represents the abode of God is now with men. And so, and because I've heard of this, like this big square city, and I'm like, okay, cool, it could still be a big square city. I'm good with that. But if you think about it, because the city there, the Lord is the light of the city. The Lord is in the middle of the city. And so if you think about this beautiful city that's coming down, and it's ornate, and it's described, and it basically essentially it kind of fills the whole earth, and that's kind of the point, right? And so if you think about that, but it represents the very presence of God, the dimensions, because the only square in the Old Testament is the Holy of Holies. It's the only thing with square dimensions, and then you have the city that has square dimensions, and you're like, wow, I mean, God was in the midst of the Holy of Holies, and now the Holy of Holies is with us, and there's this beauty. And as I was going through the book, I was driving home the other day, Dave, and I was thinking about the curse of the ground.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I thought, what if I can't? Well, could you imagine what a field would look like? And I had this picture in my mind. What would it be like if God touched a field, and every weed, every thistle, and every branch became fruitful? And as I was driving by this this grove of cottonwoods, right? And I was thinking, if God touched the ground and He uncursed the ground, He uncursed the cotton tree, what is the cotton tree uncursed? What is the ground uncursed? What is wheat uncursed? What could it be like? And that's the whole point of the glory of the Lord.
Yeah.
When the glory of the Lord, when there's a new heaven and there's a new earth, and the glory of the Lord fills everything, the curse is removed. Everything will function the way it was supposed to function, because it really speaks to God created Adam and Eve essentially as viceroys to rule and to expand the garden and His kingdom throughout all the earth. Of course, Satan shows up, they fail, and then of course you see God, in a sense, kind of trying to restart that a few times, right? David's reign and Israel, and of course they end up in Babylon and all this stuff. And at some point, the whole earth is going to be redeemed for His glory. And the glory of the Lord is going to fill this place. And everything's going to be restored. And I was what was that going to look like? Because I look across the street, right, where the construction's not done across the street, and it's just a field of weeds. Right? There's fields of weeds. But if God were to uncurse that, what would that be? Would they still be a field of weeds? No. Every one of those plants would be fruitful for humanity.
Life everywhere. That would be amazing.
Literally life everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, I am mind boggled at that thought. And so when you come into the house of God, you come into the places where He's supposed to be being worshiped. What does that look like? And Dave, I grew up in that idea like, oh, gold is gaudy and all this stuff. But then you start reading the Old Testament and you go, well, hold on a second. There was a lot there. And I know that Sandy and I had that conversation this last year. We were getting ready for the Christmas season. And I told her, I said, Sandy, this is the house of God, and it should look glorious. It should be absolutely glorious to be in this place. And people should come in and go, this is a beautiful place. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be appropriate. We don't want to be over the top. Like, we don't want to draw attention to the building. We want to draw attention to God, but the building should represent Him. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Well, again, when you walked into the tabernacle, when you walked in to the temple, everything, every furniture, every piece of furniture, every curtain, every image had a purpose. I'm a big, I don't talk about this too much because people get really freaked out. And my wife always tells me, watch out for your Twilight Zone theology. But I am convinced from studies that I did years ago, and I'm absolutely convinced of this, if you have a bird's eye view of the temple and you look at where every piece of furniture is placed, you see the cross. You absolutely see the cross. From the altar to the brazen laver, going into the holy place, to the table of showbread, the candelabra, the Ark of the Covenant, it forms a cross. And when they would walk in there, of course, not being aware of that or even having that on their radar, but then what do you see in the curtains? You see these angels. What are they doing? They're looking in the curtains, looking toward the Holy of Holies. When you looked up, you saw these massive wooden angels with their wings touching. They were the buttresses. I mean, the buttresses of the building were carved by Bezalel into the shapes of angels. And what are they doing? They're looking into the Holy of Holies. Only one guy could go into the Holy of Holies, and what did he find? 2 angels on the mercy seat, and they're bowing down. Their heads are bowed down where? Looking at that mercy seat to the Ark of the Covenant, covering the Ark of the Covenant. And God said, I will meet you where? At the mercy seat. Everything in that structure pointed to the Holy of Holies, pointing to the mercy seat where God said, I will meet you there. Well, what's the story? And I'm absolutely convinced of this. On resurrection morning, when Mary and then ultimately the others show up, but when Mary looks in there and she sees 2 angels, and what does it say? One was at the head, one was at where his feet were. What is that? That's the Holy of Holies. That's the mercy seat. God just met you right there in the person of the resurrected Christ.
Yep,
I mean, wow.
Yeah.
And so when you walk in, everything should be saying Jesus, Jesus, Jesus.
100%.
Yep.
Absolutely. Hey, we're out of time for today. You're loved, your family. We appreciate you. And by the
Yes,
way,
we
today
do.
is Lost Penny Day. So, Steve
go
finds a
find
lot of
it.
those. Find a penny. But Lost Penny Day. And by the way, that was where I was starting when this whole conversation came up, was like, hey, and if you serve around the church in the parking lot, you find a penny, you can keep it. That was what I wanted to get to, and I totally blew that. But it's also, come to church tonight because it's also Hug Day. And so come to church, get a hug. Hey, God bless you. Talk to you tomorrow.
You've reached the end of another episode of Pastors Live, a Rev FM production podcast. Thank you for listening. Submit your questions and comments by email to pastorslive@therev.fm. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review from your favorite podcast listening platform. Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or Amazon so you don't miss the next episode drop.